I'll apply some synthetic grease to the inside section of the rewind shaft. It's got a little tab on the end of it which keys it to the outside section. If I line that up, we should be good to go. Like that. And some synthetic grease in the bush. Now to get the bush back on, use the tip of a screwdriver. Just lift that tab slightly just to release the pressure on it. Allows you to get that on easier. Otherwise you can push as hard as you like and it doesn't want to jump on. 3 screws here hold this to the body. Alright, tighten those 3 screws up. Okay, let's carry on with this film advance. Apply some grease to this little gear. Put a smear underneath it and some through the centre. Now there's a little ratchet pull that goes on here, so we'll need that next. It's a little standoff. Here's our ratchet pull. And the post that holds all that together is to pass through those 2 items and line up with the hole in the top of the body. It's easy to get things trapped in there, so check that before you tighten that screw up that things can move freely. That's all good, and I'll hook that spring back behind that pawl, and you can see that the pawl is sprung loaded. And now as this advances, this piece cannot return, it can only move in one direction. That's good. We'll better carry on with the rest of this film advance. So whereabouts are we? Alright, okay. Just give a tiny wipe of grease onto this little drive dog. There's a conical spring that goes on that. The broad side of the cone goes down into that bracket. Now this piece, I happen to know that's probably about the right place to start that to give me good tension to rewind allow the film advance lever to return under its own steam. Just wipe down here with a bit of molybdenum paste, just very lightly. The return spring drops in there. That little pawl. This piece here, I'm just going to force some grease into there. Just using a little bit of hydraulic pressure. This can sit into place on the top of the body. There are 3 screws, a plain screw at this end, a plain screw in here. It's awkward to get to. It's hard to get the screw lined up in the hole so you can get your screwdriver onto it. It's not working for me today. Oh, nearly yet. There it is. That screw started. Alright, I've got that started. This screw is a shoulder screw and it runs through that spring. Now that spring's a very odd shape. Don't think you're being clever and try to square it up and make it look prettier. It's meant to be an odd shape. You start squaring things up on that spring, you will not like the result. Right, with that in place, I can tighten the 3 screws. And I've got to get this spring in position. So to press this right down to the bottom of its stroke, I can lift the spring up behind that tab. Here we have it. So now this is sprung loaded. The gear goes on the top here and should engage with the gear on here. Now I'm just looking where I am. That's the start position, but I'll need to be another full turn advanced on that. So if I press that, rotate that one full turn, which is about there. That would be the start position. We depress that, swing this lever out, gets to the end of the stroke, and it returns under its own steam to the start. That seems good. I'll just turn that around 90 degrees so Paul latches it in position. Okay, so let's carry on here. There's a spacer goes on the top of that. Let's try the action of that lever. Yeah, that seems to work nicely for me. That looks good. The cocking rack needs to go in next. So I'll lubricate this with some synthetic grease. The cocking rack on the Retina 2A cameras, there's nothing wrong with it. Anyone who tells you it's prone to failure doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Just checking the position of that, I think I'm about 1 tooth out. That looks better. Okay, so the cocking rack's in position. The shutter release shaft. Right, with the shutter release I want to put a wipe of molybdenum paste in there and there. Here is the shutter release shaft. Now normally I put a smear of synthetic grease on this shaft here, the main shaft. Slide this collar on there and that grease just serves to stop it falling off. This spring goes over that post there, that pin. You're seeing any of this? What's wrong with this flaming video camera? That's better. That spring goes over there. Put a wipe of molybdenum paste down the centre. Gosh, this camera needs a kick up the arse. That's better. Right, and I'll slide this into position. It has to go over the shaft down in the camera. I'm just eyeballing that. That's good. Now the shutter release button itself has a collar, a short collar that goes over that. And if that's not present, it'll give you grief. It's a special fault you get when that's the case. It'll be very frustrating to discover the cause of it. Okay, so that's all sitting in place. I think this camera could have the rangefinder fitted next. However, I'll have to assemble the rangefinder first. Fortunately, it's all clean and ready to go. Okay, so let's get this viewfinder back together. Oh, there's a bit of dust on there, I'll just blow that away. It's not blowing. I'll need some glass cleaner. That looks fine now. That rear eyepiece glass there is convex on one side and pretty much flat on the other. Convex side goes inwards. Get this mask back in place here. I've cleaned the body of this in the ultrasonic cleaner, and this mask comes off before you do that, because otherwise the ultrasonic cleaner does a very handy job of cleaning the black paint off it for you, and then you've got to go to all the tedious business of repainting it. Just check that that mask is nice and square. That looks good. Tighten those two screws up. Prism goes in at the end. Two small screws that hold that in position and also serve to adjust the prism. That's good. And the arm here. Well, first I need to put the bush back in that. So I'll give that a wipe with molybdenum paste. And some on that top surface, that's where it's going to contact the body of the rangefinder. Here's the brass bush. Rotate that to the position it was to start with. I've got a little mark on there so I know where it came from. That's right there. Yes, that's all been cleaned. Give this a little wipe with some molybdenum paste. Here's the wavy washer. The plain washer. And the screw. The screw head looks a little bit unhappy there, that's because it is. It was exceptionally difficult to get that thing undone. I think it was possibly corrosion was holding it in place. Okay, so that's good. Now there's the pin that goes through the spring. So I'll just tip this back so I can get this pin through the spring like that, stretch this out into position, pop that into position there, and there's our return. That's nice and free now. I'm just going to check this out the window and see what it's like. My moving image is very high, so if I slacken off this front screw and tighten the rear screw, that should shift that a little bit more again. I just want this roughly right, because all adjustments need to be made once this is back in the camera body. Oh, now I've overdone it. Right, that's close enough for this point. I can put this on the camera body next, I think. I usually put a couple of spots of lacquer on here just to prevent the rangefinder from showing any inclination to shift on the top of the camera. The screws hold it pretty firmly, but it's not like being dowelled in place. And so a couple of spots of lacquer sort that out. So I'll just drop this screw into position. Hopefully it'll fall into place. It did not. I'll try its mate. That didn't either. It's not my day. Oops, that was our shutter release falling out. We'll deal with that in a second. That's better. When you drop a screw from a great height, you expect it to fall in a nice straight line and drops exactly into position. Sometimes I don't want to. Right, those two are in position. I can do those screws up tight. Check that the arm moves on the rangefinder as I move the focus scale. That looks good. And now I'll check my alignment. No problem now with my vertical alignment. I just had to make a slight tweak to that, but my horizontal alignment, the screw here is locked with lacquer. So I'll put a drop of acetone on there to soften that. People tend to be a bit over enthusiastic with locking settings like that on the rangefinder. They don't really loosen up by themselves. Alright, that locking screw's loose. Oh, there's a lot of lacquer around that. That whole arm might be a bit gummed up with it, to tell the truth. And the rangefinder doesn't come back to, the images don't align at infinity. So I just need to adjust that here. We're getting close. The adjustments are quite subtle. Sometimes if you think you've moved the arm with your adjustments, you've probably moved it too far. Oh, that was a big movement. I've probably gone too far here. just check that that stop there is not preventing things. Let's have a look at that. That's better. This is the stop which limits the absolute travel of the arm. And at the moment that screw's obviously in too far because the arm is not allowed to return back far enough for the images to align at infinity. Now it's pretty good. I might even have to take that back slightly the other way. And I'll just lock that. Sometimes the adjustment will move when you tighten the lock screw. So you always need to check after you've tightened the lock screw to make sure that hasn't happened. That looks pretty good. That is working very nicely. Now let me get my shutter release back into the camera. And the top cover, fortunately, has been all cleaned. Oh, let's get our film release button in first. Getting ahead of myself here. Put that little spring in there. Now that compression spring, there are two springs that look quite very much the same. The smaller diameter one goes here. The larger one goes underneath that pawl down under here. If you mix them up, you won't like it. Let's get this top cover on. My film advance lever. I haven't put the screws in the top cover yet because I'm going to, I want to get this lever on first. Is it going to stay there? No, it's not going to stay. That would be too easy. Right, we'll just get things assembled here first. So we want our frame counter spring. Now this frame counter spring, as I mentioned earlier in the series videos, is actually been repaired before. The spring on the tip of it is a repair. That's fine. Hopefully it'll work nicely regardless. I'll assemble the other components to go on the top of that film advance. Or I can get them all together in one place. Now I noticed that something is missing because there's a star washer normally present and it's not present here. Now I can remember when I took the camera apart that this screw sat slightly low in the top of the film advance, and it'll be because the washer was missing. I'll have to find one.